I sort of sit between chairing a peak industry body in Australia, and I also sit on the board of WWF internationally. So I sort of come from a rather different perspective that I suspect a lot of you are here. My business background really says to me one thing, and that is, to quote Richard Branson in his latest book, people are in business to deliver change. And I can't get out of my mind that, yes, government has to provide the framework, but to resolve the issue of climate, it has to come down to business. Business, private enterprise and entrepreneurs are going to be the people that will bring about the change that we need. Business, to me, is the most dynamic force in society. You've only got to see how quickly business now is responding to a capital constraint. Business can move extremely fast. So once that framework's in place, I believe business will go about what it's very good at, which is minimising risk and exploiting opportunities. And Dr. Shui here is a classic example of somebody who has exploited those opportunities. The other points I just wanted to quickly make is for me, just roaming around, is I think clearly the West has to get into its mindset that the emerging nations do have a very strong argument that to move to a lower carbon footprint, the West has to pay for this to some degree. I was with a group that went to see Dr. Xing in India last year, and right up front he made it very clear to all us that when our emissions reach India's on a per capita basis, then India would engage about talking about climate, which was pretty harsh. It set a few Americans in the room back on their chairs. But I think they have a pretty strong argument, and I think the West has to realise that whilst it is writing cheques for all other sorts of things at the moment, I think it needs to write a cheque to help the emerging world come with us. It's all in our best interest to do this. Third, my point is that I think it's a little bit overlooked, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, is terrestrial carbon. May surprise some in the room here to realise that Australia's near neighbour Indonesia is the third largest emitter of carbon in the world, and it's purely driven through its deforestation. And to me, the low-hanging fruit in this game, one of them has to be, Tim touched on it earlier, some of the other areas of terrestrial carbon, but clearly deforestation. And there's some very interesting work going on deforestation, particularly with the terrestrial carbon group, which Copenhagen Climate Council, some of us are involved with, to try and think outside the square of a way of finding a win-win for the emerging economies with big forests and also for the rest of us. Now, I want to close on one point. To me, climate is also very much an intergenerational equity issue. And to date, the world's youth hasn't marched in the street on climate change, but I think they will. And one interesting initiative I'm involved in is the Earth Hour, which is WWF is driving globally, which is, you're probably aware, most of you, that this is where you turn your lights off for an hour. Yes, it's very symbolic, but it forces a lot of discussions between family members. And if the rest of the world's families, being like a lot of Australian families, it's the young kids around the dinner table telling their parents about why climate is a real concern. Just for interest, in this year we had about 100 million people engage in Earth Hour. Next year we're going for 1 billion, which will be the largest sort of social movement involved in one activity ever. So watch out, I think, for Generation X and Y. I think they're really going to engage in this, and clearly that would be good, because government definitely always looks at youth and what youth is thinking. So we need to keep the pressure on politicians.